Hi, I'm Matt with Schematical, and today we're going to talk about how to do continuous integration, continuous delivery on AWS using Terraform. Specifically, some Terraform scripts I've already written that you can use. It's very simple. Don't be intimidated, okay? And CI/CD is a hot topic. People have a lot of opinions on it. This is just a very technical build and deploy right now. You could add a test phase if you wanted to, or as many phases as you want to. It uses AWS code pipeline and code build, and I'll get into that and explain all that in a minute. But before I get into that, if you want to hear more stuff about AWS, Terraform, how to implement it in your small startup or large one, please go ahead and subscribe. Again, also I consult on this stuff, so if you have any questions, go to schematical.com and I'll be happy to help you there. Also, there's a great Discord where we are always chatting about this type of stuff and AI and a lot of other random things. A lot of space talk lately. So feel free to hop on there. But without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so what is CI/CD? There's like a million videos on that already, and people argue about it still. I'm not really touching that. I'm just going to tell you some of the CI/CD tools that AWS has available for you. Let's start with Code Pipeline. Code Pipeline helps facilitate your CI/CD phases. So it breaks it down into phase one, phase two. A lot of times there would be a build phase, a deployment phase, and a test phase. The source is where it actually grabs the source code from GitHub. So we've got a branch that we've specified is our branch that we're listening to, in this case, dev. And we've got a build spec in there that has the build commands that we're going to run on code build, not to be confused with code pipeline. And all that's checked in. So when there's a commit that goes into the development branch, the dev branch here, we then fire off the next action here. So here, we're jumping right to AWS code build. And this one in specific actually doesn't need to deploy because it's a batch worker. So it doesn't like deploy to previously running production servers to change up the code base there. This actually pushes up the code right to the ECR repository that runs an AWS batch here. And so this is what runs the back end of the dev version of drawnby.ai if you're following my channel here. So we can see here that the second step here actually uses AWS code build. Again, not to be confused with code pipeline, which is actually, I think, renamed into something else now. But code build is actually something that spins up a Docker container only when you want it to. So when an event comes in, it'll spin up a Docker container, and this is specifically for building Docker images, Lambda source code, the front end of the website, so it compiles React and pushes it out to CloudFront. You can do any number of things with this. And actually in the example files I'll show you later on, we've done all of those things. So code build, you can see right here a build history of last time I pushed that was 10 days ago. It ran for 6 minutes and 5 seconds. This is what reads that build spec.yaml. At the moment, I don't believe I've got a build spec.yaml example file included in any of my stuff, except for probably the PyTorch GPU batch stuff. That does have one, actually, but the rest of them don't. If you want, I can probably make those available. So if you want that, comment or jump on the Discord and bug me, and I'll make that a thing. So again, let's look at that build spec.yaml, and we can see there's a pre-build here where we set some environment variables. We log in, because this is touching ECR and Docker here, so we log into basically our container repository so we can push up Docker code to the ECR for use by ECS, AWS batch. In reality, even code build uses an image that it pulls from there. So we cd into the build directory, and we go ahead and run the build, which is just a Docker build here. We tag it. And then at the post build, we push it up and we do a couple other things. And you can see here where we go ahead and enter in the pre-build phase. We enter the pre-build phase succeeded after doing all this stuff here. This also isn't exactly the same. So, and you can see here the post-build phase succeeded there. So that is basically what it does in a nutshell. This is really useful to make sure your builds are consistent, and that somebody doesn't accidentally change something locally and they push it up and they forgot to commit it. Everything goes through version control. It goes through the servers that can run tests on it. In this case, Drawnby is not running automated tests. It's a one-man show right now, and I probably should do more of that as we stabilize, but we'll get there. You can add that. I've got a lot of other projects I've done for clients that I can't show that have more automated tests than you can shake a stick at. Unit tests, integration tests, all sorts of stuff. So let's go ahead and look at the Terraform scripts. So right now they're all in ST Terraform, but I'm going to split them out most likely in the future. So right now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at the build pipeline. I should probably change that to CI/CD, but build pipeline will do for right now. Let's look at the variables here. So we need to know what the service name is. I've defaulted to that, but I should probably make it something more generic. US East is the region it's going to run in. The environment, this is just mainly for tagging purposes. Right now it is hardwired for GitHub. We can webhook it up or trigger it elsewise. So if you have something running on another version control service and you want help making that fire this off, you can. Additionally, pretty much all of the major version control services have their own CI/CD tools. So if you want to do it with that, that's wonderful. Go ahead. I don't know how to Terraform that up offhand, but I'm sure it's doable. This is just super convenient for me. And it's really nice because you can get your containers to run, the build containers to run inside of your VPC. So if you need to like run database migrations, really useful. All sorts of applications here. GitHub project name. This is defaulting right now to my website's source code, which is interesting. So go ahead and change that to your own stuff. You can change that when you pass it in. You don't need to change it in this script. The branch you want to use. And then here, if you have a code build image URI. So if you wanted to overwrite the standard code build with something more specific, be my guest. So if you had some very specific tools that you wanted to have on the code build image before you even got it booted up to speed up deployment processes, you could do this. I've done that for clients' custom build images, so it's very much doable. The timeout defaults to 5, change it to whatever you like. The artifact bucket store, so you need to pass in an S3 bucket here, a valid one, and it'll store it there. The reason I don't define a new one here is because otherwise you end up with a new S3 bucket for every single code pipeline, and I don't think that's necessary, but be my guest if you wanted to. This one right here, your code connection ARN, is needed if you're using GitHub, which this kind of forces you to use GitHub. And again, if you need help with that, comment. I'll try and get back to you. Source build spec path. So you can have multiple source build spec paths in one repository. I've done it before. You know, you might have 2 different technically functional applications or 2 different build processes, or even you might have the build spec for tests is one, like build spec.test, and then the build spec for actually building in another. So there's a lot of different options there. That it just defaults to where it expects it by default, so that's great. VPC ID, if you want it to run in a VPC specifically instead of just the generic public. Private subnet mappings, if you want it to run in any private subnets specifically, and environment variables. So this is actually key. That's where I move some of these things too that are up here. So again, I got to clean that up. Sorry about that. Insert funny GIF here. All right, so let's look at the main, the meat and potatoes of it. Provider, as always, is AWS. Well, I shouldn't say as always, but a lot of times we're talking AWS here. So this right here gets the current credentials that are calling it, and that way you can grab the current account ID so you don't have to hard code that or anything. And again, we move the S3 bucket out of here so we don't have a billion of them, but if you wanted to add it back in, there's the code to do it. Code pipeline is right here. So the first thing we boot up is an AWS code pipeline. And we name it, and I just use service name env region. So if you wanted to customize it, you could get fancy and overwrite this, or just change the service name. The role, it'll be grabbing from the IAM role for the code pipeline, which is down below. Here it's defining your code pipeline artifact store bucket, which again we're passing in earlier. And here's the first stage right here. So there's the source action. We're going to grab it from CodeStar right here. Again, you could change this, and if you're actually interested in using this for something else, ping me, and I'll help you rewrite this. It'll be good for anybody that needs it in the future. So let me know. That runs first, and then the build, and that goes ahead and runs the code build and outputs a build artifact there. And you can see we're going to reference the project name, which we haven't declared yet. It's down below, so we'll get there in a minute. Here's the AWS IAM role. It's the code pipeline service role. And for those of you guys not familiar with IAM, it is how the services know which service can talk to each other. It's different than security groups because it's not like whitelisting specific port. It just says this service has permissions to do this, like upload to S3 or pull from S3 or upload to ECR, etc. So code pipeline can be assumed by code pipeline. So it just means that code pipeline, the service code pipeline can assume this role, no other service, so like a Lambda couldn't do this. And it can do the code star connection, so that allows it to get our information from GitHub that we connected via code star. It can do code deploy, so we actually aren't really doing anything with code deploy right here in this one, but it's nice to have. Code build, it can go ahead and run code build here, start build, git build, etc. And you can pass rules around and do some basic S3 stuff to your artifact store bucket. Nothing too fancy. Additionally, it does have an AWS security group for the code build project, so that way when it's operating in your VPC, you can at least egress. At the moment, I don't have it ingressing. Like nothing should be reaching out to it because it's not running all the time. So pretty much that just lets it talk to stuff. Now here's our AWS code build project. So this is the project that actually runs the Docker container that will build all your stuff, your Lambda, your ECS Docker image, your Bash Docker image, your CloudFront JavaScript code, or whatever you got, CSS, anything. So name, description, pretty self-explanatory. Queued timeout 5 minutes. I probably should make that a variable there, shouldn't I? Service role. So this is we're gonna find an IAM role down below that it relates to there, so it can access what it needs to. VPC config right there, so that maps to the VPC we passed in. And here's some environment variables here. There are some extra environment variables that I pass in as well and JSON encoded. The main reason for that is that it makes it easier to pass this around Terraform. Otherwise, I've got to specify each one of these separately. It's a huge pain. So, but you still can pass in any environment variables you want besides just these I pass in here. And some of these are actually throwbacks to just Docker stuff before I moved them into here. So something I need to fix up. This defines that you can write out to CloudWatch logs, or at least this tries to write out to CloudWatch logs. The permissions are actually in the IAM role. Source is here, so we got code pipeline, and here's our batch config. You can see it's pretty thin. We've got our code build timeout there, and see we're restricted to run evidently 100 builds at the same time. That would be a bit much. Hopefully no one needs that. Here's your IAM role for the code build running process here, the running task. And you can see it can only be assumed by code build. And here we are defining that it can read and write to log groups. We can do put objects. Now, I should mention, by the way, I know it's not extremely exciting to do security like this, but it's so much easier to have good security like this, as I've seen people get access to one services credentials and then do some real damage, because that basically the same IAM role was used for so many different things, or the same, even worse, IAM user was used for many different things. So having these granular permissions, very useful to prevent big embarrassment when some hacker gets a hold of some creds or gets into some service and they try and do some damage. This will keep them just to this one service. So this allows you to get your Docker token. This right here allows you to do a lot of EC2 stuff, mainly describing subnets and VPC, so it can attach to that there. And here allows you to create a network interface that it can use to access the internet. And that is the end of it. It's actually not that complicated. Let's take a look at the outputs, which I probably also have to touch up. Yeah, I should add more to this. I'm gonna have to do a follow-up video on this one, okay? Just bear with me, okay? Keep bugging me in the comments if I haven't touched it up. I'll get this fixed up for you. So that is the modules Terraform scripts in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and look at how that would actually be used in a real scenario. So this is the back end for schematical, basically, a couple of our projects, the biggest being Drawn by AI and Chaos Pixel, which is the back end for Drawn by AI. So let's go ahead and look at Chaos Pixel here. And in the main here, actually, there shouldn't be any build pipelines in the main here because we're just defining our two environments, which is just prod and dev right now. Because again, this isn't a very big project yet. So if you're interested in doing stable diffusion on the internet, especially pictures of your dogs or pretty much anything, I can run anything PyTorch pretty cost effectively using AWS with my little secrets. Check it out. But let's jump into what an environment for Chaos Pixel looks like. So this is what a Chaos Pixel environment looks like. It has a couple different services here. Here's the Lambda service. This is the RESTful API. It uses GraphQL. None of that really matters. But what builds that Lambda? So we declare it here, and then when we deploy changes out, we want that to automatically change without us having to touch the Terraform script or any infrastructure at all, right? So here's the build pipeline. This build pipeline refers to the module in an odd way. You can refer to it that way too as well. You may even want to refer to a specific hash, but just look up how to refer that. And again, hop on the Discord or comment, I can help you with it. So it was defined the GitHub owner. We defined the GitHub project name because I'm horrible at naming everything and I just call it chaos something and I change the name and it even makes it worse. And we defined the env and the code line bucket that we created and the code pipeline artifact store bucket that we created actually in the root mapping before we even got to this. And we pass in our private subnet mapping so we know what subnets that this can boot up on. And we pass in a custom build spec file here. Like I said earlier, you can do that. And a bunch of environment variables that we're going to pass in as environment extra. So for example, we need the Discord app ID, mainly because I push notifications to myself in Discord. Or the Stripe key ID, which I'm not going to show you here, because that would be really bad. So that's how the code pipeline is defined in Terraform for the Lambda service specifically. Wow, that was a mouthful. So that is the Terraform scripts for my build pipeline in a nutshell. I will be doing more of these videos on the other Terraform scripts that I use regularly and how you can use them as well. They are available online for free. Check in the show notes there. Additionally, we have a group coaching course. So if you need help with them and you're like, I'm having trouble understanding this stuff, check out that course. It's, there we do open office hours where you can come in and ask me questions and learn from other people. I'll try and record it or stream it. And if you're a bigger company than that and you've got a whole bunch of developers that need help figuring this stuff out, I do consult in a larger capacity as well. Check out schematical.com and I'd be happy to connect with you. One final note before I sign off here is that I am going to do some free, basically interviews. I want to interview people that are doing web application infrastructure using Terraform, probably on AWS, but I'd be open to talking to other people about other things. And if you're doing AI, PyTorch, all that stuff, let's chat. Quick 30, 45-minute interview. Let's, you can get some exposure, I guess, for what limited exposure I have. And I get to show people how other people besides me are doing it. There's no one perfect right way to do all this stuff. The technology evolves so fast that it's never going to be completely perfect. And a lot of times I deal with constrained deadlines, constrained timelines. A lot of us do. So how do we figure out to work around that and make sure we're not taking on a ton of technical debt? Because you don't want technical debt. So with that said, I'm Matt. Schematical.com, or pretty much Schematical like everywhere except Twitch because someone stole that. If you liked the video, hit the subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me if you didn't like the video. If you would have done something differently, tell me, because there's a million ways to do it. So thank you so much. Again, Matt, I'm Schematical. Have a great day.